The time for silence is over. There was once an unprecedented time in American history when common citizens of their day began to define the rights of man and documented how those rights were being violated by their current government. They wrote to each other. They debated with each other. Ultimately, it was these common citizens who recorded these rights for all eternity, and furthermore created a new and free nation founded on these rights with liberty and justice for all of its citizens. Times have changed, but these rights remain.
I don't take responsibility.
That all citizens have the right to life. That all citizens have the right to pursue happiness. That all citizens are created equal. That all citizens have the right to a public trial. That all citizens have the right to peacefully assemble. That all citizens have the right to petition their government. What happens when you try to exercise these rights today? Is this government honoring your rights? Or are they violating them? Is this the government that those citizens aspired to? There is a solution.
I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility.
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition. Hello and welcome to The Left Speaks. My name is Chris. I will be your host as always. Today is the 2nd of May, 4 months, 4 days shy of 4 months removed from the insurrection attempt on the United States Capitol building, for which the person who incited it still has faced no real consequences. Yes, I will keep saying that until we actually get somewhere with this. Today, we're going to be going over the filibuster, what it is, how it evolved into what it is, what it's being used for currently, why a lot of people on the left are saying that it has racist origins, equating it back to Jim Crow, why that triggers so many people on the right, why the conservatives are getting up in arms about it, and ultimately whether we should abolish the damn thing, whether we should reform the thing, or whether we should just leave it all alone and see what happens. We're going to be looking at positions from Tucker Carlson. We'll be looking at positions from the Federalist Society, Conservative Society of Judges. We'll be looking at positions from Ben Shapiro, conservative YouTube commenter, producer of the Daily Wire. We'll be looking at historical, what it was, how it got to where it is. And then we'll be looking at some positions in terms of what can be done to reform it. As always, phone lines are open, toll free, 855-915-5338, 815-915-LEFT, for those of you who remember words better than numbers like myself. Topics open for discussion today, as always, are today's show, the topic for today, and last week's show, which centered around DC statehood. Also, conveniently, one of the things Ben Shapiro was arguing against, which will include some of his opinion on that in his position regarding filibuster reform. So we're going to dive straight into the videos, and depending on how much engagement we get today, we'll see if we run the full 2 hours or not. I know the filibuster itself can be a rather dry topic. It is ultimately extremely important. Tucker Carlson and I agree on this, which is amazingly shocking. And it either stops or helps so many bills get passed that without something being changed, we're going to be stuck doing the same thing we are right now, which is not very much in the Senate. So a brief history of the filibuster to start out with.
Early on, filibusters were rare. This is a chart of the number of times the Senate has had a vote to break a filibuster in the last 100 years. But in the last 50 years, they started to grow. And now, almost every big bill is filibustered. The US Senate is broken, and the filibuster broke it. But the Senate didn't always have this rule. In fact, it all kind of happened by accident. This is the Senate in 1805. It's much smaller than it is now, and the filibuster as we know it today doesn't exist yet. And before they vote on a bill, they debate. If they want to end debate and vote, they just need a majority to agree. But Vice President Aaron Burr thinks a high-minded place like the Senate should have as much debate as needed. So the Senate gets rid of the rule. Now senators can debate for as long as they want, and there's no way to stop them. This is the beginning of the Senate filibuster. At first, it isn't really a problem. Because the Senate is still pretty small, there's only so long a group of senators can physically talk. Eventually they tire out, debate ends, and they get to a vote. But as the US grows, so does the Senate, and they have more factions and more people to filibuster bills. They move to a bigger room, and now it's 1917. World War I is underway, but the US isn't involved. Then President Woodrow Wilson asks Congress to authorize a broad military action. A group of senators don't want to give Wilson the power to enter the war, so they decide to debate until the session ends, filibuster. Woodrow Wilson is mad, and he demands that they go back to the old Senate rules, that debate can be ended with a simple majority. The Senate doesn't want to do that, so instead they compromise. They change the rules so they can end debate with the approval of 2/3 of the Senate, so that if senators want to block a bill, they need a third to do it. This is basically the system we have today. A supermajority to agree to vote, then a simple majority to pass a law. And for a few decades, the filibuster is used, but pretty sparingly.
So a few key concepts to take from that intro video from Vox. Okay. Filibuster's not in the Constitution. Anybody who tells you that it's constitutionally required or that it's, mandated in the Constitution or that by getting rid of it, you would be, altering what the founders intended and what the Constitution said, either doesn't know what they're talking about or is flat out full of shit. And there's no real middle ground here. Okay. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the Senate has to have some form of filibuster rule. Okay. Which we'll go to when we get to the Federalist Society, because they try to dance around that point. Okay. Number two, simple majority as a concept, basically half plus one, versus supermajority, which means we need a lot more than half to get something done. Okay. So simple majority, whatever half of it is in the case of the Senate, 50 plus one. Okay. Versus supermajority as a concept, which in the case of the Senate is either 3/5 or 2/3, depending on the timeline we're talking about. So 60 senators or 66, again, depending on the timeline we're talking about. Okay. But the first key thing to take away is this is not in the Constitution. It's not constitutionally required. That doesn't make it unconstitutional, as we'll get to, but that doesn't make it constitutionally required. From Dash Mickey, I always knew the filibuster as allowing somebody to just read off of a book of recipes or whatever to stall a vote. That's what it has turned into, which is why there is so much pushback to reform it. right now. But we're going to get into how it got there, because a big part of how it got there was one of my senators from the state of Louisiana, which we'll jump into. Leave it to Louisiana politicians to figure out how to corrupt a governmental system. Not Louisianians, Louisiana politicians. And I say that as somebody whose home state was Louisiana originally. Now notice, oh no, West Wing references are more than welcome here. It helps explain a lot of governmental concepts, even if you don't agree with the ultimate position that the West Wing arrived at. I don't agree with everything on the West Wing, but I agree with a good chunk of it. Now notice, we had a sudden spike in filibusters right about the 1950s. Let's go into why that might be.
Then in the 1950s, the Senate starts to consider civil rights legislation.
Oh shit.
And Southern senators really hate this. But they don't have the votes to actually defeat the bills. So they start using the filibuster to block bills. Here's South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond. He looks tired because he just filibustered the 1957 Civil Rights Act for more than 24 hours. These filibusters are painstaking, and they block the Senate from actually doing work. The majority leader at the time, Mike Mansfield, doesn't like this. He's okay with needing a supermajority to pass things. What he doesn't like are these long, pointless speeches. So he makes a change. He skips the debate and goes directly to a vote to see if there's a supermajority to end debate.
So the filibuster initially came into effect because Aaron Burr, the president of the Senate, didn't realize what the consequences of removing a vote to stop debate would result in. Whoops, we made a mistake. Okay. Now, in the 1950s, when we're trying to pass civil rights legislation, and sorry, Dash Mickey, I put it on chat so it would bring you back into it. Now in the 1950s, when we're trying to pass civil rights legislation, a bunch of Democrats in the South, the Dixiecrats as they were called back then, wanted to keep their segregation bit going. But they didn't have the votes to do it. So they started abusing the shit out of it. Okay? The Senate Majority Leader at the time, Mike Mansfield, got sick of listening to everybody sit up there and talk about nothing. Because we're not talking about debate in a lot of these cases, as we'll demonstrate in a second. Okay? We're talking about just stalling. Trying to wear out your opposition to the point where nothing happens. Okay? These people who were filibustering weren't trying to pass laws to keep the South segregated. They were just trying to stop the people who were trying to integrate the South. And you notice that big old spike in the number of filibusters in the 1950s when this started happening. That's why a lot of Democrats will point back to it and say, hey, this really became a problem right about Jim Crow. It's got some racist origins. Well, the origins, per se, weren't racist, but the popularity of it as a tool seemed to be popularized a lot by people who were pro-segregation. And in my mind, those people are racist, even if they didn't consider themselves such at the time. You're surprised anybody could stand at a podium for 24 hours? We're going to get to that. But yeah. Now, just like Aaron Burr's rule, or removal of the rule about requiring a vote to close debate had unintended consequences of creating the ability to filibuster in the first place, as we're going to see, the Senate Majority Leader during the Civil Rights era, Mike Mansfield, he got tired of listening to everybody get up there and talk about nothing. So basically they said, hey, if you're going to filibuster, let us know. We'll go see if there's enough votes to stop you from filibustering, to close the debate. We'll see if we've got the 60 or 66 votes that we need. If we do, then you don't need to filibuster because, boom, it's over. If we don't, then you don't need to filibuster and waste the Senate's time because we just won't bring that issue up to a vote. So you don't need to stand at a podium for 24 hours anymore. And boy, did we figure out where that would become a problem.
This means if senators want to filibuster, they don't have to stand up and talk. They can just threaten to, as long as they have the numbers to block a supermajority vote. This makes it way easier to filibuster, and the number of filibusters grows. In the mid-70s, the Senate changes the threshold needed to filibuster. Now instead of 34 senators, you need 41, but it doesn't make much of a difference. And then around the 2000s, senators in the minority start to realize something. They can gain more politically by fighting than by cooperating. So they filibuster everything the other party wants to do. That's what leads to this spike. Now, almost every big bill is filibustered. Finally, in 2013, the Democratic majority makes a change to the rules that says the filibuster no longer applies to certain confirmation votes. In 2017, the Republican majority makes another similar change. Both times, it feels like a huge deal. But now, things are beginning to change.
Yes, both sides can be guilty of it, Dash Mickey, as is being evidenced here at the tail end of it. The short version is both parties are getting frustrated. Nobody's accomplishing anything. And we've run into this problem before. It's why a lot of the founders, including Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, were opposed to supermajorities. When this country first started, we started under the Articles of Confederation, not the United States Constitution. Under the Articles of Confederation, every state had one representative, so you had 13 representatives there. Every state could veto anything they wanted that was going to be passed as a law. And if you didn't want to veto it, assuming none of the 13 wanted to veto it, 9 of them, a supermajority, had to agree to pass said law. And it didn't work. It's why we got rid of it. We couldn't get anything done. When we had Shays' Rebellion over tax law, and I believe it was Massachusetts, we couldn't even send help to the Massachusetts state government. And the Massachusetts militia had to handle it on their own. And I may be getting the state wrong. But even in a time of crisis, you could have one state that was like, nah, we're good, and veto the whole thing. Or you could have a small minority, because if you need a supermajority, we're not talking about the majority here anymore. You could have a small minority say, nah, we're good. And as a result, you can't get anything done. So the first Constitutional Congress came together to reform the Articles of Confederation. And Alexander Hamilton and James Madison said, this thing can't be fixed. Let's just scrap it and start over. And that's how we started writing the Constitution, which had very, very, very specific instances where supermajorities were required and did not require them on the vast majority of things. Curtis Bergeron, I'm not familiar with this topic. What is the filibuster? The short version is the filibuster is a rule in the Senate where when senators get up to try and pass a law, we'll pretend I don't like the law. Okay? I can walk up and take the floor to debate it, which makes sense. I'm fine with all sides being heard. Okay? But by debate it, I can keep talking as long as I want to until you can get 61 senators to say I need to shut the hell up. And I don't even, under the current rules, need to talk about the current topic. We're going to show what Senator Huey Long did here in a minute to abuse that. But I can read out of the phone book, which has been done. I can provide recipes for salad dressing, which has been done. I can do this for 24 hours, which has been done to stop anything from happening. And even worse now, under the current rules, if I can get 39 other senators to agree, which is pretty easy to do considering, we're 50-50 right now and party loyalty is a huge thing in this country right now, I don't even have to get up and talk. It'll never come to the floor. That bill will never come to the floor for a vote, which is why nothing in this country seems to be getting accomplished. Rack0716, welcome back. Yeah, absolutely. It's why you see people get up like Ted Cruz and like the current House minority leader in the House get up and read Dr. Seuss, because it's all about killing time so that nothing can get accomplished. It's not about debate right now currently. When people tell you, oh, we want open, endless debate, I'm fine with open debate. Obviously, I have a toll-free number, right? I talk to anybody that wants to call in. I try to have more of a conversation than a gotcha style debate like a lot of people try to do. But I'm fine with discussion and debate. But if anybody called into this show and I just put them on mute and started reading Dr. Seuss, my entire audience would think it was a colossal waste of time. And that's what we're doing in the Senate right now, and that's what we're tolerating in the Senate right now. So yes, it does need to be changed. Saucy Dough, why debate it when you can talk about it with your favorite flavor of ice cream? When you can talk about your favorite flavor of ice cream? I don't know that the favorite flavor of ice cream has been discussed, but we have talked about how to the best ways to cook oysters and the best way to make a good salad dressing. So yes, I completely agree with you. And welcome to the show. I don't know that I've seen you before. So again, a brief history of the filibuster from Trevor Noah.
The filibuster began as a historical accident. It's not some great tradition in the Senate that's protected by the Constitution. It happened in 1805 after Aaron Burr suggested a rules change.
Aaron Burr, as vice president in the early 1800s, is going over these rules of the Senate, and he made a critical mistake. He thought, we don't really need a way to stop a debate, do we? I mean, there's just a few of us. Like, we will debate until we're done, until everyone's had their say. How slow could the Senate really be?
Nobody knew it at the time. It'd be 3 more decades before the first filibuster was actually mounted. But that was the moment the Senate created the filibuster.
That's right. The filibuster isn't in the Constitution. It's just a rule that was made up by that guy who shot Lin-Manuel Miranda. And it didn't even start out as a way to block legislation. It was a way for the Senate to keep debate open, not to debate for so long that nobody could ever actually vote on a bill. So its original purpose is completely different from what people decided to use it for later on. It's insane. It's sort of like how Facebook was invented as a way to see which of your classmates were hot, and then years later it became a way to organize a lynch mob for Mike Pence, who, by the way, is hot. And you might wonder why senators back then would want to risk having an endless debate. But don't forget, guys, in the 1800s, there wasn't anything better to do. I mean, it was either listen to Thaddeus talk about a bill, or take a bumpy carriage ride back to your plantation where a bunch of black people wanted to discuss their terms of employment. You're probably going to want to hear what Thaddeus has to say.
So even like I was pointing out, when they removed the rule that said, hey, we can close the debate when half of everybody plus one, a simple majority, agrees, nobody was intending on it to turn into, we're just going to block legislation on everything we don't like. Try to get a classroom full of, I don't know, 5th graders to agree on what they want for lunch. You're not going to get 100% agreement. If you can get half, if you present unlimited options, you're doing damn good. Now imagine if we required you to get 60, 70% of these kids to agree between tacos, hamburgers, pizza, and ice cream for lunch. And you could let one kid stand up there, convinced he might get his way, and just talk until the end of the day. That's what we're dealing with. Now, Are there instances where supermajorities make sense? Sure. Those are written into the Constitution. Like for impeachment, right? If you want to remove the president from office, you need a supermajority. If you want to kick a member out of the Senate or the House, you need a supermajority. And I can understand that. But to pass anything, you need a supermajority, not just a majority. And we wonder why nothing is getting done. It's like trying to herd cats. And that's what we're dealing with. Now, to go over some of the examples of how filibusters have been used. From the great state of Louisiana, Senator Huey Long, one of the first ones to really popularize abusing the hell out of the filibuster in the Senate.
Either way, eventually senators realized that they could block legislation by debating forever. And that could get pretty ridiculous because there was no rule on what counted as a debate. So senators came up with all kinds of random ways to fill that time, which led to moments like this.
Louisiana Democrat Huey Long filibustered several bills. In arguing against a bill, he recited recipes for salad dressing and discussed at length the best way to fry oysters. His most famous filibuster was on June 12, 1935. He was able to speak without stop for 15 hours and 30 minutes. Running out of things to say about the bill, he offered to give advice on any subject someone requested.
Yep, in 1935, this white dude rambled on about nothing for over 15 hours, and somehow he gets zero credit for inventing the podcast. So unfair. But the Senate is crazy, man. This guy got on the floor and talked for 15 hours about oysters and salad dressing. I mean, they should make it a rule that you at least have to try to connect your speech to the bill that you're supposed to be debating.
I guarantee this salad dressing is delicious. But you know what doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth? Letting women wear pants.
But still, I'm not gonna lie, it's impressive that he could talk for that long.
15 hours. 15. Arguing against part of the New Deal because it created a lot of government jobs. And Huey Long didn't have a problem with government jobs. For those of y'all that are unaware, he's the one that built highways all across Louisiana, like actual pavement highways. What he had a problem with was these were going to be federal government jobs, and he couldn't use them to secure votes. So he filibustered FDR's bill because he was afraid it was going to give FDR more power than it would give Senator Long. And one thing Senator Long was for was more power for Senator Huey Long. But the fact that you don't even have to talk about the bill that's under discussion means this is not about open debate. Let's be honest. Again, if we were talking about on this show, like we are right now, whether we should reform the filibuster or whether we should keep it the way it is, and my debate consisted of me sitting here reading to you from The Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham, and the freaking phone book, that's not a debate. That's just me stalling. That's me trying to make sure that you and I accomplish absolutely nothing. So anybody who wants to say, if you want to get rid of the filibuster, if you want to reform the filibuster, you just don't want open debate on a topic, either doesn't know what they're talking about or they're lying. Just get that out of the way now, because I don't know what reading this would contribute to this discussion. I don't know what going over cooking oysters has to do with a New Deal work bill. I don't know what salad dressing has to do with a New Deal putting workers back to work bill. So we're not even talking about debate at this point. We're just talking about obstruction, which can be popular. Chips and Gravy again. Welcome in. I don't think I've seen you here before. He literally got away with being unfunny for about a good 7 years. I'm not sure who you... Oh, Trevor Noah? Yeah, I agree. He's not the funniest guy. I much prefer Jon Stewart. Doesn't take away from his point, though. Saucy Dough, you like him? Hey, that's cool. ROI226, what do I think about Tupac's case? It isn't closed yet. I'm not sure exactly which you're referring to, his open murder and the fact that they haven't brought anybody to trial. It's sometimes, unfortunately, that happens. You don't have enough evidence to nail anybody to the wall. C. Bergeron 798, welcome back in. Has anything good ever come from having a filibuster? I think you can make the argument initially back in the day, like way back in the day, that when people were honoring it as a debate tactic, right? Like, I want to spend this time trying to convince you of my point. I'm okay with having open debate, right? Obviously. Again, I support that hugely on this channel, right? Since people figured out they could abuse it, no. Again, if I could win every discussion, every debate we ever had between you and me in chat, between anybody who wants to call in, if I could win by just reading from here, we're not accomplishing anything. And I'm not trying to change your mind or convince you or educate you or whatever the case may be from my point of view. I'm not. Now, there's probably something in there that's been useful that I've overlooked or that I just haven't seen. But all the big ones that I've come across, no, I haven't seen anything that I would consider useful that's come from the filibuster. Even though there's been some filibusters I might have agreed with, I don't think it's ultimately accomplished anything. C. Bergeron, I've obviously never had New Orleans oysters. Man, I'm from Louisiana. I'm not going to lie, I'm not the biggest oyster fan. I'm not from New Orleans. I am a huge fan of seafood, and I am a huge fan of crawfish and all that kind of stuff. So that being said, I can go down to a restaurant. I don't need to listen to my senator go on for hours about how to cook an oyster. I can find plenty of people down in Louisiana that know how to cook oysters if I want oysters. Chips and Gravy, filibustering is a good way for minorities to prevent legislation that can harm them. I can see how you can make that argument. I don't see how it's been used that way in the past. And again, the founders were opposed to requiring supermajorities for the vast majority of any legislation. They listed specifically in the Constitution what would require supermajorities when it came to Senate and House, like the legislative branch. And it wasn't everything, right? The filibuster was an accident. Oh, somebody's getting nuked by the Streamlabs bot. I didn't see the actual comment, Dash Mickey, but I'll leave it up to your discretion. It looks like the mod already, or the Streamlabs mod already nuked him too. Chips and Gravy again. I think people figured out they could abuse it on day one. No, they didn't. It actually took them a while. Really till about 1917, if I recall correctly. Both sides were kind of wary on using it, and then it was used to block the Treaty of Versailles, the United States from signing on to the Treaty of Versailles. So, and then it really didn't gain in popularity. And you see the huge spike in the graph, the first huge spike in the graph, with civil rights legislation in the 1950s, trying to break down Jim Crow in the South. That's when it really gained in popularity. What is the filibuster currently stopping? We're going to get to that. A whole bunch of stuff. Saucy Dough, it's kind of scary the amount of childish behavior in American politics. I completely agree. C. Bergeron, I thought you said my name too well. Yeah, I get some of the French influence still. What's hilarious is when you're down in Louisiana, a lot of people will assume if you don't have a French last name that it is French, and they'll take a name that's not French and try to pronounce it French, and my name got mutilated all the time. Chips and gravy, but why has the Constitution been amended several times, but the filibustering legislation hasn't ever been enacted? It became a big problem recently, which we'll watch a clip on here in a second. It spiked the first time in the 1950s for civil rights legislation, and it spiked hugely again under Obama, is the short version. Amendments do require supermajorities, right? Which I'm fine with because you're amending the Constitution. Legislation is a different thing. Those are two separate things, okay? So if you want to change the fundamental document of the United States, like, adding a right to bear arms, right? I'm fine with requiring a supermajority for that, the Second Amendment, right? If you want to pass legislation, like what the tax rate should be, or what, how much money should the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, get this year, that shouldn't require a supermajority to get passed. Hell, we're requiring supermajorities right now for a judicial appointment. That's why Democrats removed that, and that's why Republicans removed it for the Supreme Court, because both sides are getting frustrated with the fact that you can't get anything done. And again, as we'll jump into here in a second as well, the founders foresaw that. That's why they were opposed to supermajorities. That's why we changed to the Constitution from the Articles of Confederation, which is what we started underneath as a country. Chips and gravy again, but neither party has abolished filibustering yet. But the spike and how it's being used and the frustration growing on both sides in the parties is leading towards it. And you'll see that. If you have something on the books that isn't really a problem, people tend to kind of ignore it. There's a lot of states right now that have weird laws on the books, right? There's some states that say that, there's some states that say that sodomy is still illegal, right? But they don't enforce it. So there's not some huge push to get this law removed from the books, right? There's some states that have weird sex laws on the books, like which positions you can use and stuff. But nobody's enforcing this, so it's not a big problem. So you don't see, this big outcry about reforming it or removing it, right? As the filibuster has been abused, that's why you're seeing more and more outcry to say, hey, we need to fix this. Because before it was being used occasionally, it was an annoyance. Now we're talking about shutting down basically the legislative body of the country, which is a problem. Oh, Risky left. That's too bad. Hopefully he can come in again under an alt and clean up his language and do a little bit better. So, the rise of the filibuster.
And that actually worked for a while, until two things happened. America elected a black president and a Senate minority leader who was willing to do anything to stop him.
The practice became an art form for Republicans under Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. During the Obama years, McConnell impeded nominees and legislation left and right. He has the nickname the Grim Reaper for a reason.
Today, it's being used in a different way. It's being used to effectively kill a measure, a bill, a proposal that the minority really doesn't like.
In fact, there have been more filibusters during Obama's time in office than in the 50s, 60s, and 70s combined.
Over the entire history of the Senate, before President Obama, just 68 judicial and executive branch nominees were blocked and required cloture, which ends a filibuster and forces an up or down vote. By contrast, 79 of President Obama's nominees required cloture from 2009 to 2013 alone.
Republicans used the filibuster against virtually every controversial bill and nomination, and some that weren't controversial at all.
Mitch McConnell has the devious distinction of being the only sitting senator that filibustered his own bill.
God damn. Mitch McConnell loves to filibuster so much, he filibustered his own bill. And he had to get 4 ribs removed to be able to do it. The man is sick. But yes, once Obama became president, McConnell began filibustering everything. Obama wanted to appoint a judge, McConnell blocked it. Obama wanted to pass a bill, McConnell stopped him. Obama wanted to watch something on Netflix, McConnell hid the remote in his neck folds. I haven't seen it anywhere. Maybe you should read a book. And once McConnell decided to block Obama's entire agenda, that became the new precedent. You know, when Democrats got the chance, they blocked President Trump's agenda just as hard, to the point where now practically every piece of legislation in the Senate needs 60 votes to pass. And that's why there's a movement to get rid of the filibuster entirely.
Like him or not, as Trevor Noah just admitted there, Democrats were doing the same thing under Trump. Which is why the system needs to change. Now, I don't ascribe to the theory that politics is a war, right? But if you go back to World War I or World War II or whatever the case was, neither side, the soldiers on either side, didn't like chemical weapons. They didn't like gas being shot at them and having to wear gas masks and all this stuff. But if one side's doing it, the other side can't keep fighting back with one hand tied behind their back. That's when we made rules saying, hey, no chemical weapons in warfare. And if both sides agree, they don't use them. And it's why we really haven't seen too much chemical warfare since. It happens occasionally, but it's usually somebody who wasn't a signatory. This is why we need to reform the filibuster. Both sides are getting frustrated to hell with this. More importantly, nothing is being accomplished in this country. President Obama's agenda or President Trump's, agree or disagree, right? We've got 1/3 of the government, the legislative branch of the government, that is being tied down by having to have a supermajority to get anything done. Which works great if your goal is to get nothing done. But most people in this country bitch constantly, in my experience, about how senators and congressmen don't do anything. When the rules are stacked in favor of not accomplishing anything, I can see why that happens. So let's change the rules back to the way they were originally written, would be my argument. And that doesn't require a constitutional amendment because, again, the filibuster is not in the Constitution. C. Bergeron dislikes Trevor Noah. Again, I'm not his biggest fan. It's not like I watch him religiously or anything. I usually catch some clips occasionally on YouTube because he'll be talking about something similar to what I was talking about. In this case, that was several months ago. From Rack, yet they still claim Democrats won't reach across the aisle. Unfortunately, Dems reach too often. I think far too often Dems will start at the compromise position. They'll start at the compromise position instead of at what they actually want. And Republicans will start over here. And then when you compromise, you've already given up from what your compromise position was. I would prefer you start with your ideal and Republicans start with their ideal. And then when you compromise, you meet somewhere in the middle. And I think Dems are too quick to start at the compromise position, like the Affordable Care Act pointed out. Saucy Doe, most political media comedian people aren't too great. I agree. Chips and Gravy again. Trevor Noah comes from a country with racist legislation at the heart of its modern system. Couldn't speak to it, but we've got a lot of old racist shit still on our books, unfortunately, too. So best thing you can do is, keep making it better. Keep making it better. Don't let improvement or don't let perfection be the enemy of improvement. Any chance you can get to make something better, make something better. Now let's look at some of the conservative positions on this.
For more than 2 centuries, the U.S. Senate has required the support of at least 60 senators before they pass major pieces of legislation. That makes for a cumbersome system. It requires compromise and patience. It delays the passage of laws. But it has endured through the centuries, despite leadership of the body. At times, the Senate has been controlled by Republicans. Other times, it's been controlled by Democrats. But that standard, the standard of 60 votes, often referred to as the filibuster rule, has never changed. We've had it since 1806 when Thomas Jefferson was the president. But why is that? It's not just because U.S. senators tend to be pompous and mindlessly wedded to tradition, though obviously they are. It's because this is a democracy. Sober people know that before you make big changes to a country, you had better be certain that a large majority of your citizens support what you're doing. That's the principle behind our entire system of government. And whatever you do as a lawmaker, you'd better be thoughtful about it, absolutely certain that what you're doing is wise and won't hurt your grandchildren in ways that you haven't bothered to think through. And that's why, for 214 years, we've required a supermajority in the Senate. It's not just an arcane piece of Senate procedure. It's central to the way the country works. But what would happen if suddenly people with very different attitudes took control of our system? What if these new people didn't care about the wisdom or long-term consequences of the things they did? What if they didn't believe in democracy? What if they considered debate and persuasion, winning people over, pointless, even immoral, and instead intended to rule by force? What if all these people cared about was power? Well, people like that, of course, would hate the filibuster rule. It would be an obstacle in their path to total control, and they would be desperate to eliminate it.
So there's Tucker Carlson with anybody who's opposed to the filibuster, hates democracy, hates the country, and only wants power for themselves. Anybody who opposes supermajorities, not simple majorities, but supermajorities, clear outright, 60, 70% majorities in this country, is only out for power for themselves, hates democracy, and does not love this country. Killichov TV, welcome in. In the judgment of several of our founding fathers, among the infirmities of the Articles of Confederation was the supermajority requirement for deciding such questions as coining money, appropriating funds, and determining the size of the Army and Navy. As Alexander Hamilton, founding father Alexander Hamilton, declaimed in Federalist Paper number 22, arguing for the United States Constitution, to give a minority a negative upon the majority, basically you always have to require them to agree, is in its tendency to subject the sense of the greater number to that of the lesser. Basically, the majority of people aren't going to get what they want constantly. Overall, the founders favored decision-making by a simple majority vote, not a supermajority one. This view is buttressed by the vice president having a vote in cases where senators are equally divided. If you needed a simple majority, or if you needed a supermajority, wouldn't matter all that much when the vice president needed to vote. So today I learned from Tucker Carlson that since the founding fathers were opposed to supermajority requirements for votes in most cases, the founding fathers of America did not love America and hated democracy. Thanks, Tucker Carlson, for that amazing bit of knowledge. Do I think Tucker really believes that? No. I think Tucker Carlson knows better. This is all about demonizing your political opponents. It's propaganda at its most base and pure level. We'll start off with something that sounds somewhat reasonable. Hey, we need to protect minority rights. I can agree with that. I think there's better ways to do it besides not passing anything without a supermajority. I happen to be in the company of the founding fathers of this country, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, people who wrote the Constitution. But because I disagree with you, and because they disagree with you, in writing, Doesn't mean they hate America. Doesn't mean I hate America. Doesn't mean we hate democracy. Go back to spouting your racist bullshit, Tucker. It's what you're good at. Rack0716, thoughts on how you can apply this to the Electoral College. I might do an episode on the Electoral College later. Short version is right now, I'm not hugely in favor of it. Rack0716, yep, I forgot where I heard this. Dems ask for a slice of bread and end up with crumbs. They should ask for a loaf in hopes of getting at least half a loaf. I agree, and I think both sides should do that as a short version. I don't think you should start at the compromise position and then compromise from there. I think you should start at your ideal position and then compromise from there. And that the other side's going to expect you to make compromises. Why would you already start at a compromise position? Saucy Doe, opinions on Trevor Noah aside, at least he's not Tucker Carlson. Agreed. So let's go to somebody slightly more sane than Tucker Carlson. Slightly more honest, I would say. Oh, I've done episodes, Bergeron, on the stuff Tucker Carlson has said before. Tucker Carlson dived into great replacement white nationalist rhetoric. That's not coming out of nowhere. The link's up on the YouTube if you want to go look at it. Yeah, he gets into some scary territory. Not everything he says, but some of it. Yeah. From the Federalist Society.
In one form or another, the filibuster has always existed in the Senate. Senators had the right to speak indefinitely and to extend debate as long as any one senator chose. The filibuster is certainly an important part of the Senate's history and a part of its rules. It's supposed to be a different kind of legislative body, one in which extended, unlimited debate is the norm. From its beginning, the Senate was a place where any one senator could continue the debate on a legislative proposal as long as he or she chose. And the final question on a legislative matter was achieved only by unanimous consent. This required senators to do the hard work of actually being on the Senate floor and continuing debate. Just a little over 100 years ago, I believe it was in 1917, the Senate adopted its first cloture mechanism. Originally, cloture required 2/3 supermajority, and a few decades ago that was changed again to bring it to where it is now under Rule 22, which is that 3/5 of the senators, or 60 out of 100, can vote to bring debate to a close. But the underlying principle has remained essentially the same throughout the history of this.
See, Bergeron, I'll have to check it out. The word racist is now unfortunately used like witch was during the Salem witch trials. It's a slippery slope. I agree. Sometimes it's overused. I am very particular about when I make that claim. And when Tucker Carlson goes on Fox News and starts talking about how white people are being replaced in this country, I mean, that it specifically ties back to great replacement theory, which is a white nationalist talking point. But yeah, I agree. Tucker Carlson has been getting more and more blatant with it recently too. Recently being, I would say, the last 3 months. But yeah, the link will be in there. You can go check it out. If you hit me up on, send me a DM on, wow, I'm having a moment, on Twitter. I kept wanting to say Twitch, but send me a DM on Twitter and I'll find, I think I clipped it out originally, just a response to Tucker Carlson regarding immigration, and I'll send that link to you specifically so you don't have to search for it. So on that bit, notice he said the Senate has always had this rule. Well, as we learned at the beginning, that is not true. It was introduced in 1805 by the president of the Senate, Aaron Burr at the time, because you used to be able to shut down debate with a simple majority. You didn't have to have unanimous consent. And notice in 1917, the Treaty of Versailles, the first time it became a problem is when the Senate at that time said, oh shit, we need a way to shut down debate. Because getting unanimous consent on anything is almost impossible. Imagine you're back in that classroom. And you can't order lunch until you get 30 kids to agree exactly on what they want to eat for lunch. And if you have one holdout, one person that still wants to debate, and I use debate in the loosest possible sense of the term, but if you have one holdout, you can't do anything. So of course the Senate reformed it. And now that we're not getting anything done again because we're seeing a huge spike in filibusters, where you don't even have to get up there and talk about salad dressing. You can just say you want a filibuster. No wonder everybody's talking about reforming it again. Vapes for Christ. Is this a patriot stream? I consider myself a patriot. It depends on what you mean by the sense of the word. I serve this country, but I'm also progressive and lean left on a lot of issues. You will find that I tend to be more conservative on Second Amendment stuff and certain other issues. If by patriot stream you mean, am I like laying down for the Republican Party and pro-Trump no matter what he says? No, you are in the wrong place. But if you disagree with me about anything on this show or last show, numbers toll free right down there, my friend. I don't duck conversations with anybody. Am I a QAnon patriot? No, I don't do conspiracy theories. When you have enough evidence for something, it quits being a conspiracy theory and becomes accepted fact. QAnons come in occasionally, Dash Mickey. Let's not lie, but none of them have been brave enough to call in yet. Vapes for Christ, you don't live in the U.S.? Well, welcome. Doesn't mean you can't have an opinion. We are, if not the largest, one of the largest players on the international stage, so I can certainly see you having an opinion about how our political system works and the way we view things. And it doesn't matter where you're from, we can all learn from each other. But today we're talking about Senate filibuster reform or abolishment, getting rid of it or fixing it, and showing that it's a problem right now and keeping us from functioning. You had a bit of a debate with a pro-Tea Party guy the other day, and he didn't believe me that a lot of Mexicans are of European heritage. You'll run into that sometimes. Federalist Society continued.
The crux of the controversy surrounding the filibuster really relates to the abuse of the process to bring about delay and to avoid debate, rather than using the filibuster to fulfill its intended purpose, which is to extend and promote debate. Article 1 of the Constitution is clear in giving each House of Congress the authority to develop its own rules of procedure. Now, whether or not it's used entirely in a manner consistent with the Constitution may be a different question. Some people have started to conflate the question of how many votes it takes to end debate with how many votes it takes to pass a legislative measure. Part of this is due to a misunderstanding of how the Senate rules have been used, and part of this is due to an abuse of the filibuster mechanism over time. It's become more controversial as it has been more routinely invoked, and even more controversial as it has become routinely invoked for the purpose of delay rather than for the purpose of extending actual debate. When members see it as simply a delay mechanism or an impediment to actual debate, it undercuts the very purpose for which it was created. When it becomes the norm and people just start to anticipate that you have to have 60 votes to pass anything, it starts to appear unconstitutional. That's really not the case. It takes 60 votes to close debate. There are other ways of bringing debate to a close. The filibuster, if used properly, pushes the Senate towards legislative consensus. That's the whole idea behind it, is to bring people together and to allow members to state their objections, to offer up improvements, and eventually to get to the point where they decide further debate isn't necessary. It's served our nation well, and I think it has, for most of the history of our republic done what it was supposed to do.
Vapes for Christ, what service branch were you with, if you don't mind my asking? I was an officer in the Army National Guard. I seem like a good dude. Thank you. I appreciate that. You seem like a nice person yourself. Keep up the good work. I'm trying. Thank you for dropping by. I appreciate it. So notice in all of that, the filibuster isn't unconstitutional, was basically the gist of it. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it's not a part of the Constitution. It is not required in the Constitution. The Senate can make their own rules, as he pointed out. Okay, that means the Senate can change their own rules. And this unintended, we're just not going to do anything. Well, now that we're not talking about debating a bill, but we're talking about reading from Dr. Seuss for hours at a time, now that it's being abused and it's not constitutionally required, seems like a pretty good time to change it to me. You know, to get back to the point of the legislative branch of this country actually passing legislation. Call me nuts, call me crazy, call me undemocratic like Tucker Carlson wanted to do, but I think the founding fathers intended for the legislative branch of the United States government to, I don't know, actually legislate. And considering they were specifically against supermajorities, because they'd already seen how this failed under the Articles of Confederation, the previous governing document of the United States of America, where they couldn't raise armies, they couldn't determine the size of an army, they couldn't coin money, they couldn't raise taxes to pay the armies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They couldn't do anything, couldn't get anything accomplished. I don't see many of the founding fathers being in favor of supermajorities now. There are already a ton of protections for minorities, minority political parties, in the Constitution written in. This was not one of them. And again, call me crazy, but maybe the reason is they lived under this in the Articles of Confederation and saw that it didn't work, which is why they threw out the whole damn thing and started over instead of trying to fix it. Now we're going to do one last bit. This is going to be from conservative YouTuber Ben Shapiro. I want to say it's about 2 minutes, so it's a little bit longer than most of the clips I play for you guys. He went on for about 3 minutes, or no, it was longer than that, about 8 minutes before this, where I clipped it. The short version is, Democrats are trying to destroy the country. There's 4 or 5 ways they're trying to do it. I pulled out the one about the legislative branch, because that's what it relates to. After we play that clip, I'm going to take about a 5-minute break, get some more coffee, and then, of course, phone lines are open if anybody wants to call in. We'll engage with chat, see if there's any further questions, any clarifications, etc. And if there's not, we'll go ahead and wrap up for the day. If there are calls, if there are chatters that want to talk back and forth, then we'll keep going, and we've got about another hour or so left. So, let's hear what Mr. Ben Shapiro has to say. C. Bergeron, I don't really object with your opinion on this matter. I do believe there needs to be a way to oppose a bill without having 3/5 vote at all times. The only way anything can be bipartisan. I tend to agree with you. I would honestly lean towards abolishing the filibuster outright as my starting position. You could convince me to go back to this person has to stand on their feet and talk for 24 hours. And then when they can no longer do that, a vote happens. I would be okay with going back to that, which is what President Biden is advocating for. That would be the only compromise I would be okay with. If you want to get up there and read Green Eggs and Ham for 24 hours, but the minute you got to go to the bathroom, your filibuster is over and the Senate has to vote, that does two things. Minorities get to jump up and say what they want to say about a subject. More importantly, they have to go on record saying what they say about a subject. It's the reason we know all of these Dixiecrats, these Democrats down in Louisiana or down in the South during the Civil Rights era, were pro-segregation. They had to get on record and say it, right? They couldn't just go, oh, I'm going to oppose this and never tell you why. Okay. Number two, so we've given them their voice. They get a chance to say what they need to say. Number two, we still start passing legislation again. Votes happen again. The Senate actually starts working again. Our legislative body legislates as was intended by the founders. That would be my compromise position I would be happy going back to, or I would compromise to go back to. So I think you and I could probably meet somewhere around there. From Ben Shapiro.
It's weird to suggest that pure majoritarianism is a solution to the problems of the United States, when in the past, pure majoritarianism has been used as an actual weapon against minorities. But nonetheless, Democrats, believing they have a majority, are now talking about fundamentally reshaping the Senate of the United States. They've talked about adding states willy-nilly to the Senate. Right? They want to add Puerto Rico. They want to add Washington, D.C. The goal of adding Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., of course, is to essentially add a bunch of Democratic senators and thus establish for themselves a permanent majority in the Senate of the United States. They want to combine that with killing the filibuster. The filibuster has been in practice in the United States since 1837. It was originally created almost by accident by Aaron Burr in 1805 when he suggested there was redundancy in some of the rules of the Senate of the United States. It was first used in 1837, but it has long been a protection for the minority in the Senate to prevent the majority in the Senate from simply running roughshod over the minority in the Senate. Democrats are quite fond of using it when they're not calling it a Jim Crow tool.
If all this takes eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, in order to secure the God-given rights of every American, then that's what we should do.
Meanwhile, Barack Obama, when he was in the Senate, repeatedly used the filibuster. And just this year, Democrats have used the filibuster to kill Tim Scott's police reform and kill COVID relief. So in other words, they're in favor of the filibuster until they don't want the filibuster to be there, in which case they nuke the filibuster the way that Harry reads it. This brings us to the fourth attempt to undermine American institutions. Democrats have been talking for years now about packing the Supreme Court.
So I left that last bit in there just so you could see he was talking about more than just reforming the Senate. Now, Ben talks fast, so I'm going to break down a few things for you. Democrats are just trying to add states willy-nilly. They're trying to add Puerto Rico and they're trying to add Washington, D.C. Last week's show was on D.C. Ben Shapiro, please explain to me how taxing 700,000 American citizens who pay higher in federal income tax than citizens of any other state in this country don't deserve any representation in Congress, any voting representation. I'll wait. As for trying to add states willy-nilly, if that was the case, Democrats would be advocating for, I don't know, breaking California into 2 states, breaking New York into 2 states. That would be willy-nilly. We're talking about adding D.C. because D.C. wants to become a state, as evidenced by the polling there. They want representation since they're paying taxes. Puerto Rico, we're open to the idea if Puerto Rico wants to become a state, because they've been a territory of the United States for quite some time. That's not willy-nilly. I'm sorry, these citizens you don't think are going to vote the way you want them to vote. But in this country, right now, today, we don't tell people, we don't tell American citizens that they don't get to vote because we might not like the fact that they wouldn't vote for our team. Democracy doesn't mean, oh, you get to vote, but only if you're going to vote for me. It's not how democracy works. Ben, you have a fundamental misunderstanding of how American democracy is supposed to work. Unless you want to go back to the last time that we weren't letting American citizens vote in this country. You know, Jim Crow, because we were worried in the South about how black American citizens might vote. Now, pure majoritarianism, to go to a second point, is something that we've avoided in this country. Well, that's fundamentally untrue too, because as he admitted, the Senate didn't start out requiring a supermajority to close this. What he ducked saying was that the founders were opposed to requiring supermajorities to craft legislation, because that's why we got rid of the Articles of Confederation. It's right there in the Federalist Papers, written by James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and countless others. That's why it's not in the Constitution that it requires a supermajority to pass legislation. There are a few exceptions to that which are clearly spelled out, like removing a president from office. You know, because that would be an extraordinary circumstance, so we would want an extraordinary majority to do it. Now, also, as you pointed out, the Democratic Party uses it too. Well, A, that's a tu quoque fallacy, so it's irrelevant. But B, that's all the more reason to get rid of it, so neither side can abuse it. Now, the other thing I want you to notice in all of this, and maybe I missed it, pure human error, but I certainly looked for it. All of the people, from the Federalist Society to Tucker Carlson to Ben Shapiro, who are advocating for keeping the filibuster, didn't provide one example of where it actually accomplished something good or great. I'm not saying there haven't been filibusters where people have gotten up and talked about what I would consider important things. But show me one where it ultimately, like, I don't know, prevented Jim Crow. Like I said, there's been some filibusters I agree with. But I haven't seen these amazing successful outcomes. All I've seen is every government grind to a complete halt. And I guess if your whole thing is you're just opposed to the United States government existing and functioning, then maybe you consider that an accomplishment. But me, I'll sit with the founding fathers of this country, who, when the federal government ground to a halt and didn't function under the Articles of Confederation, said we need to start over so our federal government can function and work. And I want to get back to that. We're going to catch up on chat real quick, and then we're going to take that break I was talking about a minute ago. C. Bergeron, BLM is pro-segregation, topic for after the break. Maybe briefly. Like I said, I mainly limit debate to this show and last week's show. So I'll touch on BLM, but I've got to keep the show moving on, and that was 2 episodes ago now. Rack0716, wonder why Ben assumed PR would be Democratic senators. The current pro-statehood movement is primarily led by conservatives. I tend to agree with you. That's the latest data I saw on it, but I haven't looked into it specifically very recently. I did DC statehood last week, but I still see Puerto Rico statehood as being closer in terms of whether they want to be a state or whether they don't. If they want to push for statehood, I would support them at this point. If they don't want to push for statehood because they're happy being a territory, I can understand that. But that is up to the Americans living in DC, or the Americans living in Puerto Rico, as far as I'm concerned. C. Bergeron, are they? I haven't heard this argument before. I'd have to look at it too as well, Saucy Doe. C. Bergeron, 798. Oh, you're going on about the BLM thing. I'll jump into that, like I said, a little bit, just a little bit, after the break. C. Bergeron, 798. Didn't seem like an extraordinary circumstance against Trump. Actually, it was. That's why he wasn't removed from office. He was impeached, but he wasn't removed from office. Now, I would argue that enough Republicans should have moved across the line to help remove him from office, because if, inciting an insurrection against the United States Capitol to stop them from confirming a constitutionally mandated election isn't enough to get you removed from office anymore, I don't know what the hell is, but whatever it is it's going to be too late at that point. But like I said, I'm okay with super majorities being required for those kind of big steps. All right, I think that's going to hold us. Everybody, it's going to be about 5 or 6 minutes. I'll put the timer up, and then I will be back after the break. We'll jump into phone calls. If anybody wants to call in, 855-915-5338, toll free as always. And if you don't, we'll just go back and forth via text and chat. Not a problem. The time for silence is over. There was once an unprecedented time in American history when common citizens of their day began to define the rights of man and documented how those rights were being violated by their current government. They wrote to each other. They debated with each other. Ultimately, it was these common citizens who recorded these rights for all eternity, and furthermore created a new and free nation founded on these rights with liberty and justice for all of its citizens. Times have changed, but these rights remain.
I don't take responsibility.
That all citizens have the right to life. That all citizens have the right to pursue happiness. That all citizens are created equal. That all citizens have the right to a public trial. That all citizens have the right to peacefully assemble. That all citizens have the right to petition their government. What happens when you try to exercise these rights today? Is this government honoring your rights? Or are they violating them? Is this the government that those citizens aspired to? There is a solution.
I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility.
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition. Hello and welcome back, everybody. Thank you for sticking with me through the break. Greatly appreciate it. As always, phone lines are open and we're going to go to talking to chat. I know filibuster is a dry topic, but if you got anything to say on it or anything to say on DC statehood, feel free to call in. Captain Redbush, welcome back, man. I appreciate you being here. The left hath spoken. I try. See, Bergeron, I'm not sure what the emojis mean with the insurrection. I would have to have that explained. The election was a fraud. Dr. Doug Franks is proving it. Let me know when he actually proves it. Because right now, all I see are claim after claim after claim and no real evidence of this shit. That's why it keeps getting tossed out of courts all over the place. Doesn't matter whether it's a Republican judge, doesn't matter whether it's a Democratic judge, and didn't matter whether it was a judge that President Trump appointed himself. It still got tossed out. And now, the people that were spreading this bullshit seem to be having to go to court themselves. They're getting the hell suit out of them by Dominion and Smartmatic voting systems for libel, slander, and defamation because they can't provide any proof. Funny how that works out. But I hope you were being ironic. Saucy Doe, is that irony or genuine? I have no idea, but we all start where we start, and as long as we engage honestly and talk to each other, and don't try to be dishonest and don't dig in so deep on our party, our team, we can all learn as Americans. Anybody's welcome here as long as they start honest. Hell, even Rusky from last show, who came on and managed to show his ass to everybody would be welcome back with a fresh start if he wants to engage honestly. I'm not interested in canceling anybody. I'm not interested in shutting anybody up. As long as we can engage civilly and honestly, I am willing to have the conversation. That's why I open it up for both this week's show and last week's show. The only reason I don't open it up to universal debate on anything is because some of these conspiracy theories, like, to use the most obvious one, the Jews control everything. Sarcasm, Twitch, YouTube, don't ban me. I'm mocking it. You have to have time to prepare. You have to be able to find sources and figure out what they're going to say and actually find the evidence to prove them wrong, because they will run in the room and say this and this and this and this and this and make a whole bunch of claims and not provide any evidence. That's also the reason right there that the previous show, last week's show, is always up for discussion, because I don't want to throw a bunch of claims at the viewers, at any conservative who may be watching, and they feel like they didn't have a chance to do their research. You might not have an argument right now for why we should keep the filibuster the way it is. And you might think that I'm being dishonest in how I represent the filibuster, but obviously you don't have time during the course of my 2 to 3 hour show to go do all the research. But you've got all this week to go do the research, and you can call in next week and we can talk about it. And I have no problem with that. I am fine with giving you time to go do your research, and I request the same courtesy in return. You give me a chance to do my research. So if there's something specific you want to talk about, you can DM me on Twitter @LeftSpeaks. You can go to the website, theleftspeaks.com, and find the link to the Facebook page or to the YouTube channel or to Twitter itself. And send me the source. Send me the claim you want to go over. And if it doesn't violate Facebook, Twitch terms of service, YouTube terms of service, I am fine looking into it and giving you my opinion on the subject. And I extend that same courtesy to you by opening up last week's show, always, to discussion, debate, and phone calls. C. Bergeron, thinking about calling, just prefer not to get roasted. Man, if you're civil, you're more than welcome. You're not going to get roasted. I'm not here to do a gotcha thing. The only call I've had that I would consider that turned out less than desirable was the one last week with Rusky. That's the only one that didn't go the way that I would have liked it to have gone, where we had a civil discussion and made some progress. And he understood why I thought what I thought, and I understood why he thought what he thought. Martin, who called in last week, and Martin, if you're in the chat, I appreciate it. Even though we didn't agree at the end, I think we both knew why the other one stood where they stood and why they thought what they thought. And every other call, they're all up on YouTube, I think has gone that way. Rack0716, just don't be like that guy from last week. I agree, but like I said, if he wants to call back in, he's got a fresh start. I'm fine with that. I'm afraid that might have been him in the chat earlier, that the auto mod ended up booting out before my moderator could even get to him. But if he wants to make another alt account and come in and have a civil discussion about DC as a 51st state or about the filibuster, he is more than welcome to call in and have a civil discussion. I am fine with meeting anybody where they are, as long as they're willing to be honest about where they are, as long as they're willing to be civil and have a discussion about it, and as long as we're ultimately at the end both trying to find truth, both trying to find the honest, real answer. As long as we're not going to deny reality to play party politics so my team can win no matter what, then I'm fine having a conversation with anybody. Again, I don't care where they start, because we've all started somewhere. We've all started on an issue and been massively wrong. And if somebody hadn't taken the time to talk to us about that and educate us so that we could learn and grow, we wouldn't have learned and grown. We would have continued in our ignorance and in our wrongheadedness. And it doesn't have to be a political issue. Maybe you've been right your entire life about everything political. I don't believe you, but maybe that's the case. But everybody's been a teenager in love or a teenager with a crush and had to learn, because relationships aren't easy. And politics is nothing but relationships with your fellow Americans. And just like in a one-on-one relationship, communication is key. So have honest conversations with each other. Allow somebody to say, I don't know, but let me go think about it and let me figure it out. I don't know about that, but what you're saying seems to make some sense. Let me go think about it. Because most people aren't going to change their opinion or change their position or change their worldview or their political stance on a thing right then and there in that conversation. But it gets them thinking about it. And if they go back and they come back to you and say, hey, I found this and it says you're wrong and this is why, you need to be open to learning and growing too. And if we can get back to those conversations with each other, that's what will make America great again. C. Bergeron, I can't speak with much experience on the filibuster or DC becoming a state. Both topics seem like a way for the left to move the goalpost to achieve their own goals. Same with packing the court. So the problem I have with that position, Bergeron, is it's not about what's best for the country. It's just about your team winning. We already saw how both Republicans and Democrats have abused the filibuster. Both of us seem to agree that it's not good for the country for the legislative branch, 1/3 of our government, to be completely useless and not accomplish anything. Same thing with DC becoming a state. You probably agree, as do I, that there shouldn't be American citizens who are getting taxed without any form of representation. Like I said last episode, we kind of fought a whole war about that in 1776. That's one of the most fundamental parts of being an American. But you're worried it might cost your team some political power. And I'm not willing to put party over country. That's why when people come in and say, are you a Democrat? I tend to vote more Democrat than I do Republican right now. But it's because I think they're more right on the policies. If the Republican Party wanted to go out and run Teddy Roosevelt again, you know, somebody who's strong on foreign policy, somebody who's strong on workers' rights, somebody who wants to break up these big monopolistic corporations. If the Democrats don't run somebody better than that, I'm voting Republican that election. I don't care what jersey they're wearing. I'm going to follow the policies and the evidence to arrive at those policies. I'm not interested in just playing team sports. This isn't LSU versus Alabama. This is about what's best for the country. Same with packing the court. I've done a bit on the Supreme Court packing before. Are you saying conservatives are like teens in love with Trump? No, I'm saying we need to get back to having honest conversations with each other as a short version. And it looks like we've got a caller calling in. I'm waiting for the auto screener to finish sorting it out. while we're waiting on that, for anybody who hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed, please do. Please feel free to make any comments you have to make. Your voice is welcome here. Your opinion is necessary for the conversation to continue, whether you agree or disagree. And if you're enjoying the content, whether you agree or disagree with me, liking, following, or subscribing, depending on which platform you're on, lets you continue to follow the conversation. It doesn't mean you necessarily agree with my political views. Aftershark, hey, welcome in, man. Good to see you too. Well, whoever was calling in just managed to lose their connection. Oh, your girlfriend called? Call right back? No problem, my man. No problem. I understand that one. Rack 0716, just don't be like the guy last week. Yeah, like I said, in full charity, I think that guy got frustrated from the beginning and just lost his train of thought. But anybody, if they're willing, including him, he's got a chance to come in, call in, start over, civil conversation. It's fine. It's fine. We can all get frustrated. We can all need some time to go away, cool down, and come back. That's fine. I get it. But let's start better this time, is what I would say. But yes, I agree with you. And no, I don't think conservatives are like teens in love with Trump. I think a lot of them have put on the Republican jersey and are very hesitant to take it off, whether it agrees with what they think anymore or not. To answer your question, Bergeron. And Aftershark, you tuned in right as we were open to phone calls. We just finished going over the filibuster, where it started, why it desperately needs reformed or abolished. And we'll see if anybody wants to disagree with it. We looked at Tucker Carlson's position on it and exposed why that was a bunch of horseshit. We looked at Ben Shapiro's position on it and it kind of exposed why he was ducking the issue entirely, talking about something else. And we looked at the Federalist Society, which did the same thing, except a little bit more blatantly in terms of saying, you know, oh, well, it's always been this way. Yeah, but it started being a problem recently. Has there been any progress on D.C. becoming a state? Besides Democrats still pushing for it, the short version is there probably won't be major progress on D.C. becoming a state until the filibuster gets reformed. I think that's one of the reasons that it's being pushed right now. All right. It looks like Mr. Bergeron is calling back in. So we'll let the screener catch him again. And then hopefully his girlfriend does not interrupt the call. If she does, hi. You have full rights to him well before anybody on this stream does.
Again, and hopefully his girlfriend does not interrupt the call.
Hey, welcome in. You're going to want to mute the stream in the background. You're live.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, I just muted it.
No problem, man. Welcome on the show. So, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for hosting the show and giving everybody, I guess, a chance to debate these topics right now. And your topics aren't really too controversial, I guess, at the moment as well. So I think that's really good. You know, these are more fundamental issues, I think, that are kind of going on with the system. That until they're ironed out, I don't think any progress will be made.
I tend to agree with you, and that's why it's hard for me to understand the opposition to it besides just party over country, right? I mean, I think most people, even conservatives at a fundamental level, because when I was a conservative, I wouldn't have agreed with, we're going to tax people but not let them have any representation. But now that it's, they might not vote our way, you have to get back to the fundamentals of what makes America a democratic country that we all want to participate in, and like I said, you're just not going to vote the way I want. It's hard for me to support that kind of position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing, though, recently that I could see would be worth filibustering, I guess, was the spending for the COVID relief. I forget what the first couple were, but I think the last one was $1.9 trillion, which was in the guise of infrastructure improvement, which only about 350 billion of 1.9 trillion was going to actually go toward COVID relief directly, or infrastructure. I'm sorry. The rest of it seemed like was going to get taken in some way or another by people in political power, whether it be, Nancy Pelosi's husband getting awarded a contract, or the Clinton Foundation, I guess, saying they're going to give relief to Haiti. These are just things I've heard of in the past, and I guess I'd like to see more of that money go to the people. And unless we have people in Washington who represent us opposing things that are not in the best interest of Americans, we're going to be taken advantage of, and our tax dollars are just going to go to issues that don't need it.
I don't necessarily agree or disagree with you. I do agree that we need people in Washington that represent, or are trying their best to represent, the interest of average Americans and the majority of Americans around the country. I don't think you're ever going to get, for the most part, unanimous consent across the country on any bill. I don't think it really matters what it is. There's always going to be somebody somewhere inside the United States that disagrees on the specifics of one particular bill. If the representatives that are elected to represent their districts, go up there and vote for a bill, and the citizens of that state don't like it, they can vote them out. If the opposition party wants to say, hey, this bill is bullshit and this is why, and they want to, advertise on that and run against that candidate on that, I'm fine with all of that. What I'm not okay with is just shutting down any legislation entirely because it's the other team. Like we saw under Obama with McConnell, right? Like any judicial appointment, it didn't matter what federal court it was to. We're not even talking the Supreme Court, right? All of them. We're just going to block all of them. You're just shutting down government functioning at that point.
Right, and any delay in progression for our democratic system is divisive for anybody. And like you say, I think, liberals could come out and say, we want to improve everybody's life quality by making sure everybody has a job and their kids have college, and kind of this socialist agenda. Yeah. We want to create a perfect utopia. Of course people are going to oppose it because there's always that underlying question of, well, how are we going to afford it? And that's kind of the problem, is that we have so much that we want to accomplish on both sides of the aisle. But until we're able to come together on these types of issues with the hard questions of how are we going to afford this stuff? Who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be fair to everyone? Myself personally, I make a decent amount of money, and it's very middle class, decent money. Yeah. But we're taxed more than anyone, and I don't personally see any of the benefits of these tax funds.
I'm sure you see some benefits of it. You have roads and highways and internet infrastructure and that sort of stuff.
Right, but not fairly. You know what I'm saying?
Well, my argument, and the vast majority of the progressive left and the socialist wing, right, would be that we just need to go back to taxing the super wealthy like we did under Eisenhower. I mean, the effective tax rate on the super wealthy in this country used to be like 93%.
Yeah, so then you've got the super wealthy taking all of their business out of the country, which then what do you do about that?
You can tax imports if it comes to it, or you can do an exit tax with the money leaving the country.
Right. So, like, specifically right now, I went to IKEA yesterday with the family. It's the first time I'd ever walked into an IKEA.
I still haven't been. Don't tell anybody.
Oh my gosh, it is it's a catastrophe. We have this huge company here in the United States selling goods from other countries around the entire world. How does that benefit us?
So the argument for how it benefits us is cheaper goods, right? And it provides employment, and you get the taxes off the sales, and you get the taxes off the income and all that sort of stuff. But more importantly, it provides the answer to your question of, well, if we tax the wealthy, they're just going to take all their money and run, right? We'll just take Amazon as an example. They could corporate headquarters somewhere else, but if you don't have any distribution, warehouses, et cetera, drivers, anything in this country, you're missing a huge market. Somebody's going to step in and fill it. And then we can tax whoever steps in and fills it, right? And this is the same thing we used to do back in the 50s. If you benefit... I'm kind of with Teddy Roosevelt on this. Those who benefit the most from American society should provide the most to help continue its existence. If American society sees fit to make me a billionaire, if I benefit from it, that I have no problem footing the highest bill to help support it.
Absolutely. So that kind of brings in like Trump's taxes into question, right? He paid $750 on God knows how many billions he made on his taxes, just in a year. But then you've also got the other end of the spectrum, like, okay, this guy who's got a lot of money can stimulate the economy by giving a lot of money. However, that guy who employs thousands of people is also stimulating the economy by giving people jobs. I don't want to get into a religious battle here, and I'm not really religious by any means, but, Jesus taught a man to fish instead of giving him fish, you know what I mean?
Jesus also said, render unto Caesar. Jesus also said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. So Jesus didn't have a problem with paying taxes back in the day either. I might, in the next couple of episodes, do a bit on trickle-down economics, which is basically supply-side economics that you were just arguing for, that if you give the wealthy, basically no taxes, then it'll filter on out. The short version is, economically speaking, we know it doesn't work. I don't have the information to provide you that with right now. I can point you to different graphs, like if you'll go Google search it, or you can wait for the next couple of shows, where the economy, if you control for time, you can pick like 2 years before the presidential office change, or the day the presidential office has changed, or whatever the case is. It consistently grows higher and faster under not supply side economics, not Reagan theory, not Bush theory, not those kind of tax cuts. It doesn't work.
Right, and I'm not saying that the top 2% of Americans who own businesses, or anybody, whether they're American or not, I suppose, that owns businesses here in the United States, don't pay taxes. That's not at all what I would advocate for.
That's what we've got right now, unfortunately, though.
So you're saying we have right now where the top 2% are the only ones that pay taxes? They don't pay taxes.
They don't. I mean, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, has paid less in taxes over the last several years than you or I probably have. Between various loopholes and write-offs and everything else. Yeah, it's just absolutely insane.
Right. I mean, I'm a welder, so I'm by no means a political scientist or anything here. I do a lot of my own research, and a lot of it is, like you say, from the talking heads that we hear through whatever form of the media it is. But I feel like everyone should pay 10% across the board, whether you're a big time, huge mega billionaire or you're the lowest of the low. 10%, that's giving your fair share, whatever that is you made. And these government welfare programs that we have currently, I think they should also treat everyone the same. Unless you have, I guess, some form of disability that hinders you from being able to have a job, I don't think you should be allowed to stay on this welfare system. I don't get how, somebody that doesn't pay anything to the system reaps the most reward. Everybody can have a job. I mean, if you're putting stamps on envelopes, you're still doing something. We've got people on the left here, the Dirty Truth guy on Twitter. He makes all kinds of memes and stuff like that, and he's literally paralyzed.
Let me pause you for a second, because you jumped on, you hit two things, and I don't want to lose them. So can I pause you for a second? Okay.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Like I said, I'm trying to be fair. The 10% across the board. Okay, I used to agree with that position. I'm going to tell you what changed my mind, and I don't expect it to change your mind live on air, but I would encourage you to go look into it. The short version is, the less money you make, the more of your income goes towards things that are absolutely necessary, right? So if I make $1,500 a month, by the time you take basic housing, basic food, basic, transportation, whether that's Uber or whether that's a cheap little cash car, basic car insurance, right? I don't have very much left over at all, right? So that 10% of my $1,500 is a whole lot more of my discretionary income than it is of the guy that's making $1 billion a year, or, several $100 million a year, right? So that's the reason that most taxes in most countries are graduated, meaning they get higher as you go higher. Your first $1,500 a month, we're only going to tax at, 5%. Your next $1,500, we're going to tax at 10%, because we're trying to let people get the basics covered, right? And then as we're trying to go after what's more discretionary, so it doesn't impact your way of life. If you made $1 million a month, right, and I taxed you at 10% just across the board, that's fine. Now let's pretend you started making $2 million a month, and I took 50% of that next $2 million. So you only netted $500,000, but your first $1 million was still taxed at 10%. I haven't really impacted your lifestyle in any way, have I?
No, not significantly at all.
And that's the argument for progressive taxation.
Right, but my argument with that is what incentive do I have to make more when I'm just going to get taxed more on it?
Because you're still making more, right? So even to make it absurd, right? Let's say your first $1 million was only taxed at 10%, and then your second $1 million was taxed at 50%. You're still making an extra $500,000 as compared to, nothing more. And you can take the same argument and point it to zero taxation, right? What the hell does Jeff Bezos need to keep making millions of dollars for? He's got more than he could ever spend in multiple lifetimes. Where's the motivation?
Right. But with that money, and I'm not a fan of Amazon at all, but what he does with his money is his business.
Thank you for the follow.
I think there should be some form of red tape set up for monopolies, but
there is. We just don't enforce it. You and I agree there. There is red tape set up for monopolies. We just don't enforce it anymore. And I'm hugely back to getting in favor of that. I think the companies and monopolies have gotten way too big.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you go back to the COVID stuff, and you had all these companies that were allowed to stay open, and they only got richer, while these small businesses, these mom and pop shops were forced to shut down. Bezos came out with Amazon and said, oh, well, we actually do support small business. If you want to support small business, you go on our website, you buy the product. But how much of a cut is Bezos getting from those small businesses now?
So why don't we just tax Bezos and use it to subsidize small businesses at that point? Because you've already, like I said, you agree with me that we're not making a substantive, impact on his life when we start taxing the super wealthy at higher percentages.
I don't understand what you're saying there. So you're saying don't tax the super wealthy at higher percentages?
No, why wouldn't we?
He's not making a substantial amount.
We should tax the super wealthy at higher percentages, and then we can use that money to subsidize to help out the smaller businesses and help them, get back to where they were pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I mean, I don't think that forcing them to move their businesses out of the country, however, would be in our best interest. Like I said, I mean, taxing the super wealthy would be great, ideally if they didn't move their businesses out of the country. When you look at like the Amazon headquarters, like in Denver, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head how many people it employs, but I personally welded the gas line going to the building, and it's a huge building. So I can only imagine that it employs probably thousands of people.
I agree with you, but this goes back to what I was saying earlier about, okay, if Amazon chose to leave the United States because, they didn't want to pay taxes, right? That market is still there. It's not like Amazon could build that distribution facility that you welded on in, England and serve the United States, the region of the country where you live, right? It has to be there to serve that market. There's not a way around it.
Right. Yeah. So without the increase in taxes for the mega billionaires, it's not going to be fair across the board. Like you said, I mean, it impacts someone like us a lot more than obviously a mega billionaire. So then why wouldn't you put some kind of moratorium on products coming from China that uses slave labor and obviously is on nowhere near the same scale as what we're able to produce here in the United States?
I tend to agree with you on that. I don't think that blocking products is the way to do it. You can tax the products in this country, or you can tax the profits or revenues made in this country by them selling those products here. I think it's too late to turn back the clock and go back to like a manufacturing economy. I think that ship has sailed, unfortunately. I would have been in favor of slowing it down back then, but obviously that didn't happen, right? I don't think that you can just cut the spigot anymore. But what I do think you can do is, okay, that Chinese company, to use your example, right, that's selling all those products over here. Those products are being sold here. We can tax the profits they're making and use it to subsidize the United States economy. And then you've got the advantage of, less expensive goods to the consumer, right? But you're still getting the tax money to provide the services to American citizens that you need to provide, whether that's, new job training, or whether that's, some kind of universal basic income, or wherever you want to go with that direction. You've got money to go at that point. You're not losing the entire tax base.
So there actually are a lot of small businesses that are coming out of the woodworks now, and they're like, hey, we're a conservative supporting company, and we've got these products. And a lot of people on my side of the aisle are supporting them, like Mike Lindell, or like a lot of these little businesses. The one specifically, I'm not trying to give them shout outs or anything, but there was one in Canada. Yeah, it's the Rock Shop, or whatever, the Tea Rock Shop or something. And basically they said, if you got the vaccine recently, we don't want you in our store. Obviously they were more on the conservative side of the aisle, and their business is booming because of it.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head right
taxes,
there. So that's just capitalism being capitalism. It's the same reason you see woke corporations right now, right? With like cancel culture being a thing, right? It's the same shit. Okay. You're conservative small business, right? Or Mike Lindell, who I would argue that's the MyPillow guy for people who don't know. I would argue he's not a small business anymore. I mean, he's been selling on Fox for years, and he's, multimillionaire at this point, right? They're doing it because it sells. It benefits their business. If it quit benefiting their business, they would quit doing it. The same is true for the woke corporations. You're just seeing both sides of this right now. That's all it is.
Right. So did the wokeism help Coke, or did it help the professional football or baseball or hockey. I don't think it did.
Obviously they thought it did, because I could ask the same questions about, Mike Lindell, right? Is him being so blatantly pro-Trump, the election was a fraud. Is that helping him sell pillows? Because I'm not going to buy a pillow from him, right? But obviously somebody in his company and him himself think that it is, and that's why they're making that decision. It's the same, like I said, you're seeing the same phenomenon from both sides.
Right. So then would you tax the goods coming from, since you say we're not what did you call it? Like an industrial, we're not creating things so much in this country.
Yeah,
Would
we're
you
not a
then tax
manufacturing
those
economy.
goods coming into the right, manufacturing economy. So then would you tax those goods coming into the country enough to discourage people from purchasing goods from overseas as opposed to goods manufactured here in our country? Or would it be just enough to basically hurt the consumer, the American consumer?
I would be more interested in taxing the profits, put it that way.
Right. So
I wouldn't
those
care to
goods, though,
distinguish
can be
between here and elsewhere, but I'm open to that argument, right? I just have to need to see more evidence on it, because obviously with the last two shows, I'm not prepared to do like a full economic debate right now. But that my gut impulse would be, you know, let's tax the profits, whatever it is, right?
So that's my position on DC becoming the 51st state, as well as any of our other territories, as well as the filibuster. You know, it just seems like another way for the left to move the goalposts to achieve what they want. You know, I understand it gets rid of some of the arbitrariness. You know, obviously using our tax dollars to debate how to cook oysters or salad dressing is very arbitrary. But you know, when it comes down to things like the COVID relief funds, or what's another recent topic they've had, police reform or whatever, you know, you're not going to want to hold those topics up in litigation forever. You're going to want to actually see something get done by it.
Correct. I do want to see something get done. Yeah. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
even if so what you're doing is what's called an argument from consequences fallacy. It's basically saying, you know, I can't address this point because I don't like the results that would come from it. And it doesn't address the central point of the actual question. So should the citizens in DC have representation? You can't just argue, you know, I don't like the way they'll vote, because that's fallacy and it doesn't help your case at all, right? You're back to the more fundamental question of, do the citizens who are paying taxes, federal taxes in DC, deserve representation in Congress? And I think you and I agree there that they do.
Yeah, I think any taxpaying American should have representation.
Okay. Then from that position, I don't see how you can get to, I don't want them to be the 51st state, without saying it's because I don't like the way that those American citizens are going to vote.
Yeah, I don't particularly think that they would only vote exclusively liberal. I don't think that would be the case at all. You know, I mean, I think they have their own opinions and they're entitled to them, as any American does.
Yeah,
However,
I would tend to agree with you.
At that point,
but they are.
At that point, would DC remain the sole power of the United States? Because then at that point, you know, you've got so many people there that have so much power and money. Then you're kind of, and this is just kind of the argument that I've heard, is that, I mean, I think I even heard like Bongino or something say something about it, like how they would basically have too much power, you know, over the government at that point if they became the 51st state. And I don't understand exactly what he meant by that.
So I haven't seen that clip exactly. So the short version is, if DC became the 51st state, they would have two senators, because they're a state, right? Same as, like, you know, Vermont and Wyoming, who they have more people than, and they would have two senators, just like Alaska, right? Who they're equivalent to. They would have one representative who could vote, in the House of Representatives because they'd still be a small state, right? I don't see how that gives them too much power unless you're trying to, and this is without seeing it for everybody else, right? Unless you're trying to like hint that the congressmen would become residents of DC, but that's not what would happen because the congressmen would have to be, you know, residents of whatever state they came from. We're talking about the people that live and work in DC, not the government people who move there, you know? So I'm not sure exactly what he'd be referring to either.
Right. So are there actually, I mean, I've been in DC a couple of years ago. I went, and it didn't seem like a whole lot of people really lived there. You know, even I stayed
720,000
and traveled down. Huh.
Yeah.
And what kind of, I mean, what's the demographic of those people? Do you know? I mean, do they work there just picking up trash and doing the basic fundamentals of a society, or is it?
So the income demographic,
do they have
the income demographic? I would have to infer. I would assume that it's higher than average because I do know for a fact that DC citizens pay a higher federal tax per person than any other state in the country, right? So not only do they have no representation, but on average, those 700,000 Americans are paying more in federal tax than you or I are, or anybody in our state is, right? I also know that DC as a district, demographically is more African American than most other states. So I would be the first state I think that would be majority African American, but I may be mistaken on that. But yeah, it's 700,000 Americans, which is more than Wyoming and Vermont, and then it's equivalent to Alaska. So I mean, it's substantial enough to be a state in terms of population.
So do they have a local government in D.C.,
yes.
like a local police force that's dedicated to, so it's actually a district, right? It's not actually a state.
It's a city currently defined as a district. The problem is the district can't self-govern. Congress can step in and override anything they want to do.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And even then, they would be paying federal taxes. So it would be like if the state of Colorado, right? Okay, yeah, you're a state and you could pay your Colorado taxes, but we're also going to charge you federal taxes and you don't get to vote for president, you don't get to vote for senator, you don't get to vote for your House representative. That would be the equivalent here. And I don't know most states that would be okay with that.
Right, that doesn't seem fair.
No, it's not.
No, not at all. I mean, it doesn't seem fair.
Yeah. And that's why I said,
No.
in my opinion, they should have representation in Congress. They have one member of Congress right now currently, but that person cannot vote. They can sit on the committee and voice their opinion, but they can't vote. So it's the same as like, you know, back in 1776 when we could write, you know, letters to the king and to Parliament, but they didn't have to listen to anything anybody over here said because we couldn't vote, right? It's the same argument.
Yeah, I suppose I would support them becoming a 51st state then in order to give those citizens of the United States a voice under the condition that there were no underhanded deals being made by senators and congressmen and women, or the president for that matter, with the local representatives of D.C.
What kind of underhanded deals? Can you just give me like one example of what you'd be talking about?
So, especially with the COVID funding stuff, a lot of people have benefited from them directly as a consequence of being someone knowing or related to some of the representatives who voted in favor of the relief funds.
Oh, okay. So you're saying you wouldn't want like the DC senators being bought off if they became senators.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's already law for any state. So I don't think you would need to have to do it for DC specifically. I think we both need.
It feels like it's so easy.
I agree. I think I think both parties hugely need to start enforcing anti-corruption measures. You and I are on agreement there. You'll get no argument for me, and we need to bust against corruption.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, brother. You got anything else for me?
Not really pertaining to this topic particularly. I'll keep doing my homework on it, and hopefully I could bring some better commentary next time.
Oh, no, for sure. Oh, absolutely, man. I appreciate you being on. And that's why last week is always open for discussion, right? So next week, if you could find something on the filibuster that I haven't seen, yeah, by all means, bring it up, because I would rather be right at the end of the day than I would win at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, man. Well, thank you for your call. You're welcome back anytime, and I appreciate you watching.
Thank you, Chris. Have a good one.
You too. Everybody, that was C. Bergeron from the great state of Colorado, conservative. I think this is his second episode being in. That was his first call in. Very productive call, and it was greatly appreciated. If anybody else would like to call in, the number is toll-free down there, 855-915-5338, 815-915-LEFT. We're going to take about another 5-minute break. If we don't have a caller after that, we're going to wrap up the show. So we'll check back right after that. And yes, I agree. After Shark and Dash Mickey, that was a very good call and a great discussion. I greatly enjoyed it. C. Bergeron, for your knowledge, I do think I'm going to do something on trickle-down economics and supply-side theory, cutting the taxes on the super wealthy, and that will be thanks to you. So probably not next week, but coming up soon, because you raised a very good question and point there, and I want to get to it. Anyway, everybody, we will be back after the break, and we'll see whether we have any calls on after that or not. Rack0716, why can't all conservatives on Twitch be like that? It's not just conservatives. It is more vocal on the conservative side right now, but it's not just conservatives. You'll see the same stuff out of people on the far, far, far left, like the Marxist-Leninists, that want to just run over anybody without any evidence. You can find people on the conservative side that are far right that will agree or that will engage with evidence and have civil discussions, just like you can on the far left. But you can also find extremes on both sides that just want to scream and holler and pretend that they're right and throw a temper tantrum. So that's why I said I don't care where anybody is, as long as they're willing to have a civil, honest discussion and engage with evidence, I'm willing to have a conversation with them. And we all need to be able to do that. And welcome back, everybody. Let's go ahead and bring chat into it immediately. Oh, Hardwood and Sock, welcome back in. I appreciate it. You had to have dinner with your parents? Completely inexcusable, my man. You got to be here. You got an appointment. Nah, you're fine. Personally, you like the filibuster. No surprise there, though. So I just did 2.5 hours on it. Well, we'll say 2 hours, really. The founders of this country, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, the people who wrote the Constitution, would disagree with you on requiring a supermajority to pass most legislation. That's why I'm opposed to the filibuster as it currently sits. I would rather get rid of it. However, I am open to reforming it back to the point where you actually have to stand and talk. So that way, when you finally have to go take a leak, the Senate actually has to vote on the filibuster. But I'm also not going to run through the whole thing again here because we are wrapping up very, very shortly. Any final questions from anybody? Because it doesn't look like we have anybody on the line. And Hardwood and Sock, you know, normally I would love for you to call in, brother, but unless it's about DC statehood, I don't want to run through all of the filibuster again. The episode will be up, and you are more than welcome to catch it and jump in and dissect my opinions for next week. And is it AMOX X or AM0X1 27 minutes ago? I missed it. Thank you for the follow. I greatly appreciate it. Of course they would, but personally I think it causes some bipartisanship. It isn't right now, though. That's the problem. Without anybody having to get up and speak, it's not. It's requiring a supermajority to get anything done. And that means nothing gets done. It's the same reason we got rid of the Articles of Confederation. Because when you require a supermajority for the most basic legislation, everything just starts grinding to a halt. You got me. I don't want another hour-long conversation. I would love to have another hour-long conversation, but I've already been going for 2.5 hours and I got a family to get back to. So next week, you are more than welcome to call in and have that 30, 40 hour-long conversation, whatever it takes for us to hash it all out. You know that. For anybody who isn't aware, Hardwood and Sock is a now moderate conservative out of Pennsylvania who's called into this show multiple times and is a very loyal viewer and an excellent caller. So he's always welcome to call in. Yeah, I know you will. I appreciate it, man. If I'm wrong, like I said on the last call, I'd rather know than win. I'd rather be right at the end of the day. Saucy Doe wants to make Hardwood and Sock a Marxist. You got a long way to go, my friend. A long way to go. But I will say for Hardwood and Sock that if the evidence and the arguments are good and lead in that direction, he will start moving in that direction. Same as myself. As long as you're willing to do the same thing, Saucy, if it starts moving back towards less of a Marxist position. Hardwood and Sock is working on getting on some panels that need conservative voices. There are several. Prime Kayes, Primecayes. I believe he's out of Pacific time, but I may be mistaken. But later in the evening, he runs open Discord panel. And you can put Discord on your phone and call in via that. So, I mean, he does do an open panel, and he moderates fairly fair, and it's open. You don't have to like pre-vet or anything. I also know Dylan Burns TV, I believe it is. Dylan's the host, but I think it's Dylan Burns TV also runs a panel, but it's invitation only, if I'm not mistaken. He doesn't run an open one, but he is looking at how to run an open one and seeing if he can make it work. I also know Smite Knight, who you've seen in this channel before, is looking at starting a panel in, I want to say a month, because he's moving somewhere where there's better internet. So I'm sure you'd be welcome there as well. C. Bergeron, 798, death before Marxism. I'm not a Marxist. I'll say that much. I don't think it would ultimately, until we get to a post-scarcity society, I don't think it really works. If somebody wants to vote that way, I have no opposition to it. I will vote against them currently, and they are welcome to change my mind with, evidence and reason and logic. But that's not the evidence and reason and logic I have seen thus far. It does not lead me that far. Because even though you're not super conservative, you can definitely argue with the left at Hardwood and Sock. Yeah, you can argue with the left. I would also encourage you to argue with your own side when they go batshit crazy like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and tell your, representatives to vote her out. Because I don't care whether it's far left, far right, center left, center right. I'm going to go where the evidence leads. And like I said, for me, that has led me towards progressive left policies. That's just me, right? I think that's where the evidence leads. I think I have good arguments. I have good evidence for those positions. And if I don't, I'm willing to change them. But I'm willing to call out either side when they, start deviating from evidence. I'm not willing to let ideology stand in the way of reality. Rack 0716, Dylan has someone do hippy dippy recruitment sometime during the week. I forget who hosts it, but Ricky the Great One should know. Yes, I agree. Ricky the Great One's also another good leftist streamer. It's not very much of a debate stream for those of y'all that are used to my style, right? He does open conversations sometimes, but it's very different tone than mine. But he would know, and I can find out for next show if people are interested in that. Mr. Geek does recruitment for Dylan. That's what I've heard, but I wasn't sure after Shark. So if you're sure, thanks for dropping it in. I appreciate it. C. Bergeron, Marjorie has good intentions. I disagree entirely. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene will say whatever she needs to say to appeal to the base of her party. Nobody who is advocating for Jewish space lasers as a conspiracy theory has good intentions. And I think the Republican Party should have booted her the hell out, because that's ridiculous. They should have sent her butt back to her state and said, sorry, you need to try again. Send somebody more realistic. Anybody who's talking about Jewish space lasers isn't contributing in a valuable way to American democracy. All right, we're at 4:35. At 4:40, we're going to run the exit trailer and call it a weekend. I hope to see all of you guys next week. Again, if you have not already, like, follow, subscribe. Doesn't mean you agree with me on everything politically, but it does mean you enjoy the conversation and you want to be a part of it. Neither is Pelosi from Hardwood and Sock. I don't agree with Pelosi on everything, but that's an entirely different level of crazy to be talking about space lasers, sent up into space by Jewish people to cause California wildfires than it is to be talking about, I disagree with her opinions on, BLM or on tax rates, right? I may think John McCain was wrong about a lot of things, but I can have a conversation with a John McCain. I can't have a conversation with somebody that's separated from reality. And, a Jewish space laser conspiracy to cause wildfires in the state of California is not a reality-based position. She is contributing nothing to American democracy, in my opinion. C. Bergeron 798, you never heard about the space lasers? From Saucy Doe, she tweeted about it. And from Hardwood and Sock, she is pretty whacked, man, not a bastion of hope for the Republican Party. I agree with all of that. Yeah, you can find all of her information on that. She very much buys into the QAnon conspiracy stuff and to the Jewish space laser bit. That's something she directly came up with. That is not me exaggerating her position. The wildfires in the state of California were caused by Jewish space lasers. She made that shit up, not me. And I'm sorry. That's like saying we should have Alex Jones of InfoWars up in the Senate or up in the House of Representatives. Those people are not contributing to this country. They are detracting from it. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't have freedom of speech to spout what they want to spout, because neither one of them is advocating for violence in politics or violence against other people, right? But those people aren't adding anything when it comes to considering laws and considering policies for America that's beneficial. If anything, they're detracting from it. C. Bergeron, where do they get these wackos? You like Rand Paul? He roasted Fauci. I have a different opinion on how Fauci handled Rand Paul. I don't think Rand Paul was in his area of expertise remotely. And I think that was demonstrated. But you and I can disagree there. That's fine. I do think Rand Paul is more sane than Jewish space laser girl. I could have a reality-based conversation with Rand Paul about a lot of things. I don't think I can have a reality-based conversation or debate with Marjorie Taylor Greene. DeSantis and Noem for 2024, hard disagree. But we'll dive into that as we get closer to 2024. By the way, it's not going to be DeSantis that's running. It's going to be Tucker Carlson. First time I've said that on air, but I've been thinking that for months. I also think that's why he's coming out more blatant in his positions now to appeal to the hard Republican base. I don't know that he'll run seriously hardwood and sock, but I can almost promise you at a minimum he's going to set up a campaign so he can grift for donations. I do think he might run. I think that's why he's pushing the boundaries on what he can get away with on Fox News right now, like, you know, advocating for great replacement theory and shit like that, as you've seen me go over. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. I appreciate everybody who participated in chat, everybody who lurked and watched, and most especially C. Bergeron 798 for calling in. It was a great call. Hardwood and Sock, about the first hour, covers my position on the filibuster and where it came from and why I think it should be reformed and why I don't think it's currently working the way it was ever intended and how it was accidental each time that they kept making it worse. It usually takes YouTube about a day, honestly, to take it from live stream and upload it as a video. So you might want to check back. But that way you know what you want to talk to me about next week. We'll watch the exit video. And everybody, as always, I greatly appreciate you tuning in. If you agree, disagree, etc., like, follow, subscribe, as long as you appreciate the conversation. And for those of you who are conservatives, share it on social media. Get the people that agree with you that might be able to, you know, help me understand the filibuster better and the benefits of it or whatever the case is, to call in next week and help me walk through why I'm wrong, because I don't think I'm wrong and I think I laid out a very good case. But y'all who've been watching know damn well that I'm willing to hear pretty much anybody out as long as they're civil and honest in the discussion. And we need to have these conversations with each other. That's the part that we're missing in this country right now. Thank you again for tuning in, and everybody have a wonderful weekend. The time for silence is over. There was once an unprecedented time in American history when common citizens of their day began to define the rights of man and documented how those rights were being violated by their current government. They wrote to each other. They debated with each other. Ultimately, it was these common citizens who recorded these rights for all eternity, and furthermore created a new and free nation founded on these rights with liberty and justice for all of its citizens. Times have changed, but these rights remain.
I don't take responsibility.
That all citizens have the right to life. That all citizens have the right to pursue happiness. That all citizens are created equal. That all citizens have the right to a public trial. That all citizens have the right to peacefully assemble. That all citizens have the right to petition their government. What happens when you try to exercise these rights today? Is this government honoring your rights? Or are they violating them? Is this the government that those citizens aspired to? There is a solution.
I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility.
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition.